All right, let's get into it. Baseball. A film by Ken Burns debuted on PBS Sunday, September 18th, 1994. Over the next week and a half, the history of baseball was laid out in such great detail and description never before told. Over the course of 10 episodes, Erik and I will rewatch and recap each inning, discussing key moments from that inning. Right from the start, within the first 2 minutes, we're introduced to the story within the story, and that's the Brooklyn Dodgers. And there's sometimes glorious and sometimes, maybe mostly, heartbreaking moments. But before the documentary dives into any of that, the first half of inning one is spent mostly on the early days of baseball and romanticizing the beginning of the game. Legends saying that Abner Doubleday invented the game in Cooperstown, New York. However, Abner Doubleday claimed to have nothing to do with the game. History of baseball is more linked to rounders and town ball. The legend of the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown and Abner Doubleday is just romance, not fact. We learn early on of Alexander J. Cartwright, who established many of the foundational rules that are still in today's game. The early game also had a very Wild West feel. A lot of independent teams and leagues before and even in the early days of the National League. After the top of inning one, we get an introduction to the uglier side of baseball. The reserve clause, which held the players with no rights. The egregiously named gentleman's agreement, which kept the game white. And we're introduced to Moses Fleetwood Walker, Major League Baseball's first African-American ball player. He played with the Toledo Blue Stockings in 1884. 42 games, 40 hits, 23 runs before being run out of baseball. We're also introduced to Cap Anson, considered at the time as the best player of his century. A Hall of Famer, 3,435 hits, first player ever to 3,000 hits actually. A career average of 334, but maybe one of the worst human beings in the game. He was a key figure in the start of the gentleman's agreement, saying he and his team wouldn't play against teams with black ball players. We're also introduced to Jim Devlin, maybe the most popular and best player first banned from gambling. He and 3 others from the Louisville Grays lost 7 games in a row and the pennant. Devlin and the others claimed they weren't being paid by the owners. The issue of gambling can be seen as a result of the reserve clause, which limited how much a player could make and their movement to any other team. The reserve clause also helped spawn the Players League, led by John Montgomery Ward, but that only lasted a couple seasons, as the National League did their best to snuff the rival league out. That, coupled with too many leagues, the National League, the Old Beer and Whiskey League, which is a great name for a league, by the way, and the Players League, led to the demise of all but the National League. On the lighter side, we're introduced to Cy Young, who won 511 games and is one of the greatest pitchers of all time. We also have a brief introduction into Branch Rickey, who will play a major role in future innings. We're also introduced to the Baltimore Colts of the 1890s. Along with the Boston Club, they were the best of that decade. Baltimore won 3 pennants, Boston won 5. But it was Baltimore's team and their personality that stands out. They were a team full of fight and vigor, and some of the best players of all time. One you've heard of, Wee Willie Keeler, or at least you've heard of the saying that he coined, hit 'em where they ain't. Keeler hit 424 in 1897. 424. Also on that club was John McGraw, the man who would go on to spend 40 years in baseball and be known for many things, among them being one of the greatest managers, but also one of the dirtiest and maybe cruelest players, spiking, spitting on opponents, doing whatever it took to win. Inning one really sets the tone for the entire doc. It's not a rosy recounting of the game's greatest moments. It will celebrate the greatness, but it will also shed light on the low moments and the flawed. And with that, Erik, I want to give you the first volley. What were some of the key moments that really stood out to you that you took away from inning one?
Well, one of the things I noticed is crazy because, like, how history repeats itself. Right now, the owners and players are fighting right now, and
Yep.
that's gone back since the early days. When they couldn't, when they had that reserve clause, you talked about how they weren't able to leave their own team. They were stuck with their own team, and then they said this is practically slavery. This is and the owners they didn't want to budge, so they start their own league called the Players League, but they couldn't they couldn't make enough money there. So it's just crazy that the owners and players, it's been since the 19th century, and still going on today. So we're worrying about it. We're going to have baseball because they can't figure it out, So I found that pretty interesting. I forgot how far back that went. Then you got I found it funny when they talked about when the first guy that throws the curveball. And the purists were upset. This ain't baseball. Even that goes all the way back. Every time there's something that changes, we get upset. It's like this ain't baseball. It goes all the way back to 1800s.
Right.
They were talking about game's not like it was back in 1860. Just found that interesting. It's just crazy how those things just don't ever change. But I'm the same way. I complain about a lot of the changes, but that's how baseball is. It evolves and it changes. So
yeah, it was interesting. That reserve clause, I think that would last for about 100 years, where you couldn't leave your team. And it's interesting how there's almost I keep going to this word. We had it a couple times in the open. There's almost a romance or a charming nature to a career if a player spends his entire team with that club, right? We hate to see when Bryce Harper leaves the Nats and goes to the Phillies. We want Bryce Harper to spend his whole career in the Nats. And then when Cal Ripken spends his whole career with the Orioles, we applaud it. But that goes back to that is dated back to a really bad time, a really dark period of baseball and everything, is that they didn't stay with their teams really because they wanted to. They had no choice. And in staying with their teams, they were unable to maybe get paid what they were worth. They were stuck. They were employees of the owners. And it's funny how we kind of look at if a player spends their the whole time with their career, it's a good thing. And even the Hall of Fame looks at that. If you bounce around to 7 teams, it's kind of frowned upon for getting into the Hall of Fame. It's better if you stay with one team, unless you're a generational talent like Griffey. He played a lot in Seattle, but then he also spent time in Chicago and Cincinnati, moved around a little bit. But it's that whole thinking is very it's very interesting, just how we kind of say that it's great if a player spends their whole career with one team, and that really comes from something that's kind of negative in baseball's history. The gambling thing was interesting too, because that spins right off of that reserve clause. It was a very prevalent thing, gambling, and all of that was sort of rampant in the country, not just in Major League Baseball, but in other areas, the stock markets, almost everything. And really it snuck into baseball, and what fueled it was this reserve clause. I can't make enough money to feed my family or live the way I need to live because these owners kind of have me here. So I know that I can, make a few bucks if I strike out or throw a game or do whatever needs to happen. And you know what? I don't really feel much loyalty to the owner anyway, because he's kind of got me stuck here making little money here, and I can't leave. So the whole reserve clause thing, I think those were two of the big moments of the whole episode, was the reserve clause and the gentleman's agreement, which is atrociously named, but that's what it was. Oh yeah, it was coined. Those two moments, those two pieces to this episode, really, I think, almost define the whole first inning. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah, that's the two biggest things right there, because that set the stage for, like you said, I don't know how many years, 60 years they had the reserve clause, and that gentleman's agreement went for way too long. I mean, it shouldn't have been there at all in the first place. But it took 1947, something like that, before Jackie Robinson finally, but absolutely ridiculous. We don't. But that's how it was, and those were the two biggest things, I think. Yeah, that's the kind of set the stage there for Major League Baseball once we got to the 20th century. I was just saying how they kind of capped off the end of the episode. I like how it ended out talking about, Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb. They were just being born right there at around 1900. And they were kind of going to save the game a little bit because it looks like it was going a little downhill. But
they needed it. Yeah, there was there was a lot of the long season. It was Boston and Baltimore. They were the two. They just kept winning. They won 8 of the 10 pennants in the 1890s. So the long season was no longer looked at as a positive factor, and so people just weren't going. And yeah, they needed players to come along and save it. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of feel like where baseball gets to these pivotal moments where it needs personalities, it needs players to come along and save the game. And it happened after the strike. It could happen depending on what happens right now. Who knows how this whole situation with baseball is going to play out right now. But if fans come away from whatever happens with a negative aspect to it, it's going to need guys like Acuna and Tatis, and I mean your guy there in San Francisco. I think Yastrzemski's great. Trout, the second half of his career, going to need those guys to maybe lift the game back up, because there could be, if they don't play games, or if they settle on 50 games but everyone's turned off that it's only 50 games because of the millionaires and billionaires going at it. There always seems to be some wave of players that come and save the game. Almost, they bring in a new crowd. I did want to mention the whole Cap Anson thing. That's the one thing that I really hadn't really watched anyone in a while before I watched this. And the Cap Anson thing is something that really that was a big takeaway for me, was how he was so instrumental in that gentleman's agreement, because he was, again, I said it in the open, he was a monumental racist. He wanted Fleet out of the game. He wanted to get all players of color out of the game. Said he wouldn't play on a team or play against a team that had any black ball players. And you got to think that's not a little thing, because Cap Anson at that time was essentially Mike Trout. He was the greatest player, first player to 3,000 hits. And he's like, I'm not playing and my team's not playing. And you already had, really bad racial tension back then as it was. So this was just the reason to do it. So Cap Anson really gets a black mark on this episode for me.
Yeah, it's too bad that he had to be the biggest star, had to be one of the biggest racists, and he was born in, not making excuses for him. He was born in 1860 or something, and who knows, that it was obviously terrible back then. We still had slavery and Civil War, but it's just a shame that he had to be the biggest star in the game. It would have been nice if the biggest star in the game would have been someone who would have said, "Hey, everybody should be allowed to play. This is ridiculous." But
right.
It was Cap Anson, and yeah.
You're right. If he could have maybe been a little bit lighter hearted on that and been a little bit more accepting and say, you know what, I want to play against the best players. I don't care what color they are. Then maybe we didn't have, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Yeah. But there you go. So let's dive into it. We have a couple of some topics that we want to dive into, some segments, if you will. The first one is the time machine moment. What is, I'll volley this first one to you. What's your time machine moment from this first episode, from this first inning, that if you could get in a time machine, go back to, and that you would want to witness firsthand, you would want to be there firsthand for? What's your time machine moment out of this first inning?
I kind of love that there's a point in time where the game really evolves into baseball. I think it was Alexander Cartwright and the Knickerbockers. They start changing the rules. They start saying, okay, we're going to do, I think at first it was first team to 27 runs. And they said, no, 9 innings, 90 feet. We're going to make it into a diamond. Mm-hmm. All those little decisions to turn baseball into what we know as baseball. That would have been really cool to be part of that, to be there when they're making the rules and see how do they determine it's going to be 90 feet, because like somebody said in the video, like if it was 80 feet or if it was 95 feet, game would be completely different.
Yep.
Batting averages would be completely different. And the way it's 90 feet is like perfect. You hit a routine grounder, they should just about have time to throw you out. But if they bobble it or make a mistake, you're probably going to be safe. It's like 90 feet was the number. And I just would like to see how they come up with all those rules and the discussions, and 3 strikes, you're out, 4 balls is a walk,
Right.
all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
that'd be cool to be part of that.
For me, I guess I think there's 2 for me, and it's Cy Young. Watching him pitch, being able to go watch him pitch, that would have been cool because he is considered, they named the award after him, right? So to see Cy Young pitch would have been great.
Yeah.
And that 1890 Orioles team, I'm sure if you weren't in Baltimore, you hated them. So, but I think that it would be cool to see that 1890s Orioles team. Wee Willie Keeler. That 1897 season where he hit 424. That's just, in any era, that's incredible. So the 1890 Orioles for me. What about, we might agree on this one, the do-over. What's the do-over for you out of this? What do you look back on and say if they could do it over again, that needs to get redone? What's your do-over moment from this episode?
Well, it's probably got to be one of the things we talked about already, either between the reserve clause or the reserve clause gentleman's agreement. But I'd say if I had to pick, it'd be the gentleman's agreement, because that's a do-over moment right there. They started allowing some of these guys into the league, and then then they came up with that crap. I know there was going to be racism because it was part of the world, unfortunately. So they were good, but they still should have been allowed to play. And hopefully we would have evolved past that as we kind of have now. Not completely, but a lot better than it was then. So yeah, that's one thing that we blew it on, putting that gentleman's agreement in.
Yeah, we agree on that one. That would have been a much better history for baseball if that had just never happened. That would have been, there's a lot that the world missed out on with that gentleman's agreement. So that's definitely a do-over moment for me as well. And who's your standout from this? There's a lot of guys in this that I feel sort of stepped up and really shined. I feel like, Buck O'Neil over the course of the documentary became such a well-known baseball historian, and to the point where, they were clamoring for him to get into the Hall of Fame. His playing career wasn't Hall of Fame worthy, but his ambassador piece really was. And I think it started with this documentary. It was around this documentary. So O'Neill's good, Costa's good. There's a couple guys that are good. Who's your standout for this from some of these interviews?
I'd probably say, Buck O'Neil was awesome. That's no, he was awesome. I loved hearing him. Costas was all right. He didn't get a whole lot of. I didn't, those 2 or 3 interviews in the first inning. Robert Creamer. He was good. A lot of them. I guess I'd say Buck O'Neil, because I love how he talks about the game and how he says it tear you can get up here and it'll tear you down here, but there's always another day. So I just love the way he talks, and I thought he was probably the best. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
I like, and I like Daniel Okrent too. He had some good stories and some good retelling. I think for me, the standout, and it's almost for the whole series here, is John Chandler, the narrator of this. His voice, the tones, the way he records it, it's just fantastic. He did this one with Ken Burns. He did Civil War with Ken Burns. He did a couple others, but just the retelling of this. I don't know if this series would have been as good if it wasn't him telling the story. So for me, for this first one anyway, he's a standout for me.
Yeah, they found the right guy for that, because he's awesome. Yeah. When I was 14, I was like, oh, Ken Burns is awesome. I just assumed he was the one talking, but no, somebody else, but he's awesome. Whoever he found is really good.
Yeah, he was great. So that is going to do it for this first rewatch recap of the Ken Burns documentary covering inning 1, our game. We will be back soon to do inning 2. Can't give everybody an exact time, but we do want to try to do this weekly or bi-weekly, or as often as we can. Shoot, maybe we'll even get to a point where we put 2 up in a week. But for now, we will be back soon to get into inning 2. But I hope you enjoyed sort of going down this road, rewatching, reliving inning 1. Erik, thank you for joining. Look forward to doing more. Any final thoughts?
Oh no, I think that's about it. Covered it. Talked about John McGraw. I was just gonna say he was a beast. He was a Giant, so I'm a Giants fan. But
yeah,
that was a crazy guy. Anyway,
he took. I think they get to it in maybe one of the later ones. He took. I mean, the Giants colors that he took to New York. That whole. He took the Oriole colors. That's why the Giants are the colors they are, because he took the Oriole colors, because that's where he started.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's kind of.
I think I forgot that. Yeah,
I think that comes up in a future one, but we'll see. We'll keep an eye out for that. Anyway, thank you guys again for watching, viewing. Erik, thank you for joining, and we will be back with you guys with inning 2 soon.